Hi there, St. Stephen's folks. I want to say lovely to see you, but I have to wait a little while before we get to see you. But it's lovely to be able to preach this word to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you face to face. But for the moment, through the miracle of modern technology, I'm coming to you, and I want to speak today about restoring broken relationships. I'm thinking about those relationships that were once foundational for us. Family relationships, neighborly relationships, perhaps business partnerships. Relationships that have fallen apart. And it grieves us that's happened, and we don't know how to put it back together again. We long that somehow we could find a way to restore them. I've got relationships like that in my life, and I guess you do too. And of course, we could wait for the other person to take the initiative. We could feel so hurt by what they did and said that we, leave it to them to take the initiative. They caused it, they can fix it. We might think along those lines. But we're Christians, and we know the God who delights to make friends out of enemies, the God who in Christ was reconciling the world to himself. We know the teaching of our Lord that we are to love our enemies and bless those who curse us. And maybe we're already praying, Lord, show me how I can take some steps to put this relationship right. Well, today I want to speak about three qualities that are pretty much essential if we are to restore a broken relationship. Now, those qualities are faith and grace and sympathy. And I'm drawing them from the wonderful 42nd chapter of the book of Genesis, which tells us about a very important day in the life of Joseph. This is the day that Joseph is reunited with 10 of his brothers. And it's the day when together they have to confront or begin to confront what happened 20 years before. And how Joseph approaches this and how the story is told has a wisdom in it, which I think is incredibly helpful when we are thinking about restoring broken relationships. And I should just say that this is not the whole story of reconciliation, neither of Joseph nor for us either, but it is a beginning. It's kind of like an introduction to the restoration of broken relationships. Let's first just remind ourselves of the story so far. It's an epic story, of course. Joseph belongs to a very unusual family. Their family story is that Joseph's great-grandfather, Abraham, had an encounter with God that led him on a journey, a kind of pilgrim journey, a nomadic journey in search of a promised land, in the hope of becoming a great nation, and also in the hope of somehow blessing the whole world. And that sense of destiny was passed on from Abraham to his son Isaac, and from Isaac to his son Jacob. Now, Jacob had 4 wives and 12 sons. That's right, 4 wives, 12 sons. What could possibly go wrong? Well, quite a lot did go wrong, and much that went wrong had to do with Jacob's amazing favoritism. Of his 4 wives, he loved Rachel the most, and of his 12 sons, he loved Joseph and Benjamin the most, the sons of Rachel. And it was that favoritism that got Joseph in trouble right back in the beginning of this story. You remember the special coat that Jacob gave to Joseph. You remember, I'm sure, Joseph's dreams, which he foolishly shared with his brothers, dreams of sheaves of wheat bowing down and of the sun, moon and the stars bowing down, dreams of his family bowing down to him. No wonder then that on that day when his brothers saw him coming in the distance, they said to themselves, "Here comes that dreamer, let's kill him." Well, actually, in the end, they didn't kill him, but they sold him to some traders who took him to Egypt. And that was the last they saw of him until this day, the day recorded here in Genesis 42. In the intervening 20 years, Joseph has suffered and also experienced blessings. And he has become very successful, the governor of Egypt, second in charge. And at this time, there was a famine in the region. And so Jacob has sent his 10 sons to Egypt to buy grain. And so as chapter 42 begins, there's Joseph supervising the sale of grain. His brothers arrive, they come up to him. Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. I guess by then he looked like a standard Egyptian. They come up to Joseph, and the first thing they do is bow down. And I'm reading from verse 6. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Imagine for a moment how Joseph must be feeling. Imagine how incredibly complex this is for him. Here are his brothers, his own family, the people who rejected him and hated him. And why? Because of his dream. And the first thing they do is bow down to him, fulfilling the dream. What sense is Joseph supposed to make out of that? My dream was true, I was right all along. Well, maybe, but no comfort there, no joy there for Joseph, is there? You'd rather be wrong or not have the dream and spare yourself all of that suffering of being cast off by your own family. And so we have to imagine, I think, that for Joseph, all the complex pain of the past comes rushing back for him. Now, sometimes when we think about Joseph, we portray him as kind of the wise custodian of the family, as if his wisdom and his success allows him to, as it were, kind of oversee a reconciliation, a process of reconciliation. But I just don't see it that way. I don't think Joseph wanted this. I don't think Joseph hoped for this. I do think Joseph was expecting his brothers to come. I think he'd already decided that he would not reveal himself to his brothers. That's why we read in verse 7 that he pretended to be a stranger, and that's why he spoke through an interpreter. And I'm pretty sure that Joseph did not want that chapter, that painful chapter of his life, dredged up again, opened up again. Joseph was married. He had 2 sons. The first son he called Manasseh. Manasseh is like the Hebrew word for forget. And Joseph said about that name and that son, God has made me forget all my troubles and all my father's household. Joseph thought he had forgotten the past. And then his brothers turn up and they bow down to him. And we read in verse 9, Joseph remembered his dreams. I don't think Joseph wanted this. And I think from this moment on, he's improvising. From this moment on, he's kind of making it up as he goes along. And I think it's always like that with damaged relationships. It's always like that when we head out to restore a broken relationship. And that's because it's so subjective, it's so unstable. We were active participants in the breakdown of the relationship, and we've got to be right there in the middle, working hard to restore it. And in that messy space of a damaged and broken relationship, everything is unstable. Not everything is negotiable. Everything is arguable. Everything's up for grabs. There's nothing stable or secure there. We can stabilize it for ourselves if we decide, or if we insist that we know what went wrong, if we insist that we know what the other person has to do to put it right. That will stabilize it for us, no doubt about that. But the relationship will never be resolved. There has to be a meeting of minds. There has to be a sharing of the load. There has to be something like a gathering in the middle, a meeting halfway. And what that means is committing yourself to a process and you've got no idea where it's going to go. Restoration only comes by opening ourselves up to the other person, by sharing the load. And that means opening ourselves to an unpredictable process. And I think that's pretty much what's happening here in Genesis 42, the beginning of an unpredictable process. And so here we have Joseph suddenly, surprisingly, swept up again into the turmoil, the whirlwind of his family life, against his better judgment, against his preference, caught up again in the turmoil of his family. But this is no longer the foolish 17-year-old who boasted about his dreams. This is now a mature man. And back then he had no power, nearly none, but now he has nearly all the power. How will Joseph use the power that he now has in relation to his brothers? And how will we use the power that we have in relation to the broken friendships that we want to see restored? And that brings us back then to the three qualities that we will need if we are setting out to restore a broken relationship: faith and grace and sympathy. Let's start with faith. So there's Joseph, there's his brothers, and Joseph speaks harshly to his brothers. We can forgive him for that, I'm sure. He accuses them of being spies. He throws them in prison. You can well imagine him thinking, well, I had 2 years in prison. You can have a couple of days in an Egyptian prison. See if you like it. Of course, the brothers deny that they're spies, and they explain that they're a family, and that explanation is their family story. We're a family. We're not agents for another nation. We're not trying to spy on you so that we can invade you. We're just a family in need. And in the course of that explanation, they revealed that their father Jacob is still alive, and so also is their other brother. He is still alive. So Joseph comes up with an idea. 9 of his brothers will stay in Egypt, and 1 of them will go back and get Benjamin. It's kind of a test of their truthfulness. You say you have another brother, well, go and get him, bring him here. When I see him, I'll be convinced that you are not spies, and I'll give you grain. Of course, there's more going on here than that, isn't there? Because Joseph knows they've got another brother. This is a way of slowing it down, of reaching out and of making contact with his beloved full brother Benjamin. So he throws his brothers in prison, and they have 3 days to meditate on what's happened. He has 3 days to think it through. And in those 3 days, Joseph changes his mind. And I'm reading now from verse 18. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live." He's about to tell them what they are to do. "Do this and you will live, for I fear God." Joseph has come up with a better plan, a more modest plan. But before he explains the new plan, he speaks about God and explains himself, "For I fear God." I don't think he means, I'm afraid God is going to do something to me or to you. I think he means, I honour God, I revere God. And somehow his awareness of God in that 3 days had allowed him to rethink what he had in mind. And I think this points up the first quality that we'll need if we're to work towards the restoration of a broken relationship, and that's faith in God. What does faith in God have to do with the restoring a broken relationship? Well, I think it means that we believe that we're not acting in isolation, that God is watching, that God is interested, that the process of working through this relationship matters to God, and also our own conduct is done before God and in the presence of God, and that it matters to Him. Broken relationships are messy and unstable, and to trust God in the midst of a messy relationship, well, that's an anchor in the storm, and it's certainly comforting to know that our relationship with God is stable and secure if we are embarking on a process with a very unstable, very shaky relationship. In my experience, though, faith in God is not an anesthetic. Faith in God in the midst of a broken relationship, it doesn't dull the pain, but it does make us more courageous, and it makes us more hopeful. It gives us a sense that with God we can find a way forward. I think it's possible for one person to have faith for two, even if that faith just expresses itself in a silent prayer right in the heat of the moment. Lord, help us. Lord, help us. Help us find the way forward. And if your faith is small, you can pray that God will give you more faith. I believe, help my unbelief. Pray for faith. If you're heading out to restore a broken relationship, Pray for faith. Pray for a prayer to pray right in the heart of things. And let's not underestimate the power of prayer. Right there in the heat of the moment, in the thick of the negotiations, to have a prayer in your heart is a powerful thing to bring into that relationship and that context. So